This video will be analysis of a very specific combat demonstration that I gave, and you can see that up in this corner up here, because I did a live stream where I play tested my party that can never lose. Again, it's in the iCard up here, and it's also in the description down below. You can see either the build guide for the party or the actual combat demonstration. The combat demo was done live, so you will not find it in the videos tab of my channel. You need to go into the live tab to look at the stream VOD. But I assure you, it is fully there and unedited. I didn't even trim anything out of the beginning because I am lazy. That's right, it's not edited for purely my convenience, not yours. But you can see that I didn't cheat anything because it's, well, live. And as such, I thought that would be very important. And in this video, I just want to go over what happened, and I'm going to start spoiling stuff very soon, how the party actually lost, and why that happened, what mistakes I made, was it rigged, blah, 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 and I want to go over all that kind of information. So, with that, I say, let's go ahead and get started with what the rules of that event actually were. And so, for this event, the rule set was pretty simple. I came up with the rule set myself, and I did it to be noticeably a very difficult rule set. And I think I went a little too hard on it, but basically, the crux of the idea was, in one adventuring day, go through several extreme encounters, and the party should be strong enough to take it if things go well or things are balanced properly, but we'll see how that turned out for me later. And extreme encounters are supposedly even fights where both the party and the enemies have a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. And so you usually only see them once in a campaign, and usually only if the party has prep time. And I would have no information about anything I was walking into, at all. So I do all my spell prep at the start of the adventuring day without knowing any of the themes or anything about the encounters going into it. And as a comp with 2 prepared casters, that's an issue. If I had spontaneous casters, it would be less of a problem, but going into that many extreme fights as a composition with 2 prepared casters that don't know what they're preparing for, that's a major downside. That's a major drawback. And so the goal was just simply beat those extreme fights, and then the party's declared the winner. If I TPK'd at any point, I'd have to gift 5 channel memberships, and then I've lost. And that was the idea. So there we go. Now let's start breaking down exactly what happened in each of those encounters. So the first encounter had a haunt that represented 80 of the 160 XP budget, so half of the threat was effectively this hazard. That'd make us roll will saves against being confused. And basically, you cannot get out of this confusion by just taking damage. And it's rough. Because basically what happened is all of my characters were unable to play the game except the fighter, who eventually critically succeeded and thus became immune for 1 minute, as there were other creatures actively trying to kill us. And here they are. These are constructs that were very stupid, and they had a mechanic, which is pretty common among constructs, where basically they have a hardness and a high AC until they're brought down to half HP or take a critical hit, in which case they drop down to 22 AC and no hardness. So they lose 4 AC and a bunch of hardness upon hitting that half HP mark. And so the fighter basically would kite them around the battlefield and kite them into his allies so that the allies would randomly punch the enemies and would just try and do a bunch of stuff that way. And it mostly worked out. We did actually end up winning this encounter. And so we just kind of beat down these guys, and then when the confounding betrayal was the only threat, people were just kind of knocked out non-lethally, left to stabilize, and eventually we just kind of like locked the witch in the room by herself, and then let the occultism checks roll until the hazard was defeated. So that was how we beat this encounter. In the swamp, we had a big fight against a solo dragon that was 4 levels above the party. So 160 XP up in pure dragon. I have a series on, or like a video on the most overtuned monsters in the game, which you can watch. I don't know if I'm going to remember to link it, but I'll try. But basically, dragons are overpowered, just generally. They tend to be like an entire level of power above their stated written level, just by the amount of versatility they have, because they have one of the fastest speeds in the game. Oh look, a fly speed of 160. That's fair. And great martial prowess. Great. Also, a reaction that denies all movement, and also a great area damage attack, and more movement options to let you do big damage, and then also applies an area fear, and also has good saves, and then also has a great AC, and it's a dragon. It also had spells. That didn't matter, but it had spells. Dragons are silly in this game. And what basically happened in this fight is we threw a helpful steps up, had people running over to the dragon trying to grapple it. We eventually got it down here. We were able to punch it, grapple it, or trip it, have it be on the ground. Failed to get off the grab. It saw what the resentment witch was trying to do. It flew away, proceeded to kite us out, and we lost. Because we didn't have any fly spells, we didn't have any way to lock it to the ground from 120 feet away. And I know somebody in the comment section is going to say, I don't think bows would have helped at all here as a secondary off weapon. If we had a party with 3 archers in it and a spellcaster to help equalize the math, I think that party still would have lost, because a big old breath weapon would just, still kill you. And the dragon has a lot of HP and a lot of AC, so I don't think that would even work. That's how dragons be. Truly, I don't think that there is a party that would consistently fight this stat block as an extreme fight and come out feeling good about their chances to win. And I'm saying that generally. Not even in the sense of, well, this party wasn't equipped for it. I don't think that there is a party that can feel super well equipped for this without any prep time ahead of time, because yeah, you could prep stuff like Earthbind or whatever. And I'm actually going to try and pull up Earthbind in Foundry real quick. Because if we had Earthbind, which by the way, not on the spell list of our casters, but if we had Earthbind, we could make it so that way it had to be on the ground. My game plan was to build your own Earthbind by using the Cleric feat Cast Down, and using that along with a harm spell that would be cast and let it be forced to fall from range. And when it comes down, we'd then grapple it, and that'd be that. So that was the game plan. It didn't quite work out because we just failed to get that grab off. And I'll go into more details on why when we come back around talking about the tactics section. But for now, just know, we couldn't successfully get the grab off, so it was able to fly around kite us. And now for the tomb. This was a fight against 2 shadows. Each are an on-level creature, so worth 40 XP each. And a mummy pharaoh, who is 2 levels above us, and thus worth 80 XP, making the 160 extreme budget. Shadows have a primary gimmick, where they steal your shadow and make you enfeebled, which lowers the value of all of your strength checks and DCs, including attacks, including grapples, including trips, and your escape DC. Where the Mummy Pharaoh had special abilities of, ooh, I'm gonna blast you, I'm gonna make it so that you don't get to play the game and have to make saves against area damage every single turn, and also I become concealed to things outside of it. And also, it gets to buff up all of its allies for free. Oh, and its Reactive Strike, it's actually the Furious version of Reactive Strike, the Furious stance. So it just gets to attack for any concentrate action, and also cancel it on normal hit. Also, it has above fighter accuracy, if it needs more, and above fighter damage. It has like barbarian damage. Oh, and has a lot of HP and AC, and also pretty decent saves except reflex. Do I need to say more about this thing? Mummy Pharaoh is a very overtuned stat block, and that's part of why we lost. We were able to deal with the shadows, but by that point we had a bunch of layers on Enfeebled on basically every major character. And the fighter had a total of 4 layers of Enfeebled, actually, by the end of the fight. So the fighter was swinging out at below martial accuracy, which is really sad, but it's true. And we just didn't have the HP and resources left to get anything going. Because the cleric kept on getting crit out by reactor strikes. I could have probably played around it a little bit more, but I got greedy. And I didn't know it was the type of reactive strike that would cancel on normal hit, and I felt like I needed to take the gamble in order to have a chance to win. To go for 3 action heals to deal damage to the shadows as well as the Pharaoh, and heal up all of my allies who were all pretty low. So I did have reasoning behind that play, but it didn't work out. And that's the gist of all 3 encounters. So now, we're moving back to the first encounter to go and talk about the tactics. In this encounter, we won, and it was basically just an RNG luck check. I will note, being a very, very defensive party makes it so that your allies hitting each other isn't as big of a deal. And the fighter still being alive and thus forcing enemies to chase after him and being able to use hallways and stuff to advantage is powerful. And it was just overall pretty nice. Well done. And I think that if I had a more damage-focused comp, they would have wiped here. Because they would have failed a couple will saves and would have killed each other in 2 rounds. So if I had like a barbarian and everything else, like if I replaced champion with barbarian or something like that, I think we would have wiped. Actually. No joke, we probably would have wiped. Right here. Just because the barbarian would have crit the witch, crit the cleric, and that'd be the end of the game. Against the dragon, quite a few things went wrong. And I mentioned that it's because I wasn't super familiar with the dragons of the post-remaster world. So when I saw a dragon lurking around the forest, I assumed, okay, it's probably numerically similar to a green dragon. And if I pull up an adult green dragon, which is the same level, you could see Fort is still its weakest save. Well, I guess I'm just not that familiar with dragons in general then. Because most dragons will have Fort as a very strong save. So if I just look up dragon in general, and I go into like the mid-high level dragons and I look at red dragons, Fortitude save is its highest. White dragons, Fortitude save is the highest. I look at black dragons, Fortitude save is the highest. I look at brass dragon, Fortitude save is the highest. I look at a gold dragon. Hey, look at what's the highest. Fortitude, but tied with will. And you notice all of them kind of have reflex be their lowest save as well. Fortitude save much higher than the rest here. But this is just like the one time that rule is not true. So I didn't know that grapple would be more likely to succeed than a strike on an off-guard horned dragon because it was prone on the ground. And I also was really scared of the crit effect happening, or the crit fail effect of a grapple, which knocks you prone, or lets you get grappled. So like, as much as I did have +2 to grapple compared to strike, I was still going for stuff like combat grab, instead of grapple, which would have been numerically stronger, just because I was not familiar with this creature's stat block. And if we had time to prep ahead of time and I got to make recall knowledge checks before the fight, that would have been different. And for the recall knowledge check I did get, I think I just failed it outright because I got 1 off of combat assessment. And that was the 1 recall knowledge I got, just because trying to hit the high level DCs with recall knowledge is really difficult. A DC 28 is not an easy thing to do, even if you have a 15 in this in the skill, because like that means I need to roll a 13 or better in order to succeed and get an answer to my one question. And if my question wasn't, what's its fortitude compared to its AC, which I assure you, it was not that question. Because why would it be? All the other dragons have 4 as their highest save. This is basically one of the, and me missing that one grapple was the reason we basically lost. Dragon was then able to be overtuned, high HP, fast flying, etc, 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 and beat the crap out of us. But yeah, dragon fights are super hard. Give your players prep time if you're gonna throw like a severe dragon fight at them. Don't use an extreme dragon fight. It's just unfun. Ending me coming in here, realizing that I never actually mentioned why I think bows wouldn't work. And it comes down to them being very expensive to rune, them requiring a stat investment to have that accuracy, them needing to do crit damage in order to actually do good versatility. If we're going to crossbows, now we are starting to talk about loading and having only 1 shot per turn. And if we're talking about doing a 2-action range activity to try and deal damage, we're back in the realm of the magical cantrips. So I like the skill variety from mental more than I like the skill variety from dexterity. So if I'm trying to give every character a range attack, I'm going to be doing it in the spellcasty way so that I can actually cover my skill variety on the mental side. There really wasn't much we could do. We also had a very low number of hero points compared to how fast we were playing and the amount of rounds of combat we were getting through. Because in an average session, a combat for me is usually longer, and so giving out a hero point once per hour, longer in terms of rounds to be clear. And so giving out hero points like once per hour usually means that people have enough hero points to be able to reroll stuff. But this first encounter in the old library, I was trying to hero point people out of their confusion, which meant I didn't really have hero points going to this. So we just couldn't do anything about our failed dice luck, where a normal party going into this extreme fight at full resources would have had more hero points. And generally in harder fights, you're given more hero points anyway. So not having free rerolls, it turns out to be a pretty big deal. Yeah. It also is super far away a lot of the time, so the witch just straight up didn't have spells that it could use because the occult list is very short range, except for like revealing light was the only real super long range spell I had on my entire list. Just because there aren't that many good super long range spells on the occult list. I think occult in general is a very weak list. It has a lot of really big weaknesses. Like, it has the worst area damage of any list, by far. Because Divine has spells like Sudden Blight, which is 1d10 per spell rank, 20-foot burst, same range as area as Fireball. And yeah, it's less damage than a Fireball, but it's still 20-foot burst. I could not find an occult spell with a 20-foot burst in like my searching of the lower rank spells for this. I couldn't find one, period. And then Divine also has Divine Wrath, which is sanctified spirit damage. Can sicken creatures as well on failed saves. And then it also says foes. Enemies in the area take damage. So it doesn't hit your allies, you avoid friendly firing because Divine Wrath is just that good. And this is due to remaster, thank you Sanctification, and removal of alignment damage. But now Divine has very consistent area damage and Occult just doesn't. That makes Occult the only list without real consistent burst area damage. And I know that doesn't matter for this experiment, but it matters in my heart. So that was like a notable thing that I was really struggling against trying to prep this comp. That's why the Cleric had basically the focus of the area damage despite having a worse spell save DC. That's the word for it. Against the mummy fight, the shadows were basically able to split our attention away, and we had to group up in the middle, and this guy could then just area effect us down because the champion reaction is what our entire comp is built around. So we needed to have people in range of the champion reaction. And the champion reaction for Redeemer is, of course, Glimpse of Redemption. You can read that here. But the entire comp is built around this idea of we make people enfeebled. We have the feat that also lets us make them stupefied with Weight of Guilt. And it just generally, this entire fight went poorly for us from the first moment because we got area affected down to like half health each. We end up not being able to kill the shadows very efficiently just because this big resistance is very bad. It's just, it was hard for us to deal with shadows just because incorporeal creatures are very hard to deal with for grapplers. And I knew about this weakness, which is why the fighter had a Ghost Touch weapon. Technically, by Raw, Ghost Touch does not give you the ability to trip or grapple ghosts. But a lot of GMs rule it that way. And I didn't have the coin because there's very tight starting gold on starting at a new level tables for items, and I spent a lot of that on Wands of Tailwind. But I was able to afford Ghost Touch for the fighter. And so that was the only reason I had damage into the shadows, so I was letting the fighter deal with the shadows, as champion would basically try and run interference along with the witch, doing slows, doing all that kind of stuff, as the cleric kept on getting reactive strike to death. As I mentioned, the stat block is very overtuned. And that was the gist of what happened here. How could I have played better? People are going to say you shouldn't have been clumped up in the first place, but no, I need champion reactions to go off. The way to do things better would be to know about this thing's reactive strike ahead of time and play around it with the cleric. That's really the only counterplay I had access to, is playing around reactive strike more actively and respecting it more. But I think we would have also wiped because the cleric was at very low HP a lot of that time, so a shadow could have come over, bonked him down anyway. But it would have probably given us like an extra turn to play with. Not sure if that would have mattered, but like that is a thing we could have done. Other than that, shadows plus Mummy Pharaoh buffing them all up is just really difficult to deal with, particularly as a comp that relies on strength. If we were a comp that didn't rely on strength, like with kineticists and stuff, and archers, I guess, the Mummy Pharaoh probably still would have rolled us all the way to the bank, just because its stats are that high. And I think that we would have needed a fire or water kineticist to deal that damage consistently. And so our lack of elemental damage really showed here. And this is where people say, why don't you replace the fighter with a Magus? And to that I say, I really wanted to have reactive strike on all the levels, including early game. And so I think fighter is the better choice for this team comp at most levels. But in the time between level 6, where classes get reactive strike, and normal level, I think 10 or 12 is when fighter gets its extra reactions. I think it's 10. I could be wrong. But fighter gets extra reactions eventually that it can use for reactive strike very efficiently. And it gets stances to make its reactive strike even better. And the reason I wanted reactive strike so much is the champion and cleric both go for trips, and that punishes them for standing, which gives us more time to set up grabs, which thus lets us do our whole thing very efficiently. And so reactive strike is actually a big important key piece of that to provide a damage threat to the grapplers. And fighter's DPR is just very solid overall. It has good defensive profile, so that's why I went with fighter. And then somebody's going to say, why not barbarian? Still, the same thing of reactive strike. This party was designed before the remaster. Now it's a lot closer if we want barbarian. And I also want to have the fighter be able to provide recall knowledges. You cannot recall knowledge while raging as a barbarian. And you can't do the thing of splashing into these types of range cantrips to give the damage type variety to get rid of regenerations. And that's kind of the gist of it. A Magus would have also just gone reactive strike to death because it's very difficult to try and say, oh, just play a Magus when you're talking about beating an enemy with reactive strike. That's just not how things go. if we didn't have this champion raising shield and just kind of dancing around this area of the map, we would have died like 3 rounds earlier. The champion cleric is really the core of this party. In the VOD itself, I questioned the legitimacy of if we really needed to have Witch. And I think Witch is really, really good once you have the lock set up to make sure the lock never, ever breaks under any circumstances. I think that its life boost will help you in fights that are normal. I think the Witch makes the party insanely consistent. However, consistent wasn't good enough for these encounters, because extreme encounters require that much more, especially extreme encounters with overtuned creatures that have good matchups into you. So we need to have something more explosive in the Witch's slot to beat these encounters specifically. I still think that Witch is the best character for this party overall. I still think Fighter is the best character for this party overall in that slot. And I don't think it's that much better than Barbarian or Magus in that slot, to be clear. I just think that in the early game, you really want to have that reactive strike so that trips are more efficient. And generally, I think that most of my mistakes were due to lack of information before we started, specifically in my spell prep. Because if I didn't have these Divine Wraths, instead I had heals or big debuffs or something else, that would have been better. If instead of this on the Witch, instead of the Pernicious Poltergeist, if I instead had another Tortoise in the Hair and replaced this slow with another Soothe, we probably would have had a better time. And just that kind of thing, because we never had an area damage fight where those types of spells would then instantly win. So I think that's really what went wrong. It was a lot of issues in the spell prep part of the game, and then bad matchups in the creatures itself, as well as this party being very good at consistently closing out against severe fights, not so much against the matchups into extreme enemies, because this party is all about mitigating damage down to almost nothing. And that's very hard to do when parties are evenly matched. Very easy to do when you start at effectively a power advantage, which you do in most encounters in Pathfinder. So I think that this is how you would challenge a party of this nature. You can throw overtuned creatures at them. You can throw creatures that apply status ailments. Because this is basically they played my game to me. They made me weaker and used area damage and burst to lock us down, used reactions to limit what we could do, and they basically played my game on top of me. And that's how we lost. That and dragons being overpowered. Dragons are overpowered, if that wasn't clear. And again, in this encounter here, we won because we had poor damage. And because we were so defensively focused, we were able to just kind of win that way. But that's the gist of my recap here. If I had complete foreknowledge, I would have not prepped area damage. And I would have prepped more into the utility and the boss killing. That I just didn't think I needed to do, because I wanted to be ready for all kinds of encounters. If we were spontaneous, it would have been a different story. If we were blah, 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 blah. But I think the comp still performed really well, considering the amount of limitations that were even more stringent than I thought they were. That lack of knowledge really, really bit me in a lot of ways. And yeah, that's the video. And I may do streams of combat demos or other things in the future, so stay tuned for that. I know the next big thing I'm going to be involved in is when Starfinder 2 playtest drops, I'm going to be doing a live stream with Ronald the Rules Lawyer on his channel. And we're going to be reading through the stuff together, so subscribe to me, check out Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and check out Path Primers for prepping these absurd encounters that completely showed that I am full of crap. Give that guy some love too. I have linked that channel in the description. Yeah. Like, subscribe, do all the stuff. This is a very off-the-cuff review, but this is basically the culmination of my thoughts on the experiment overall. And if people want me to make more follow-ups on what types of things I'd fit into specific parties, leave that down in the comments below. But yeah, for now, I'm signing off. I'll talk to y'all later.